We're going to talk tonight about the Pope's exorcists. So tell me about
great.
Gabriel Amorth. He did over 60,000 exorcists, something like that?
Yes, he performed tens of thousands of exorcisms. The number went up well over 70,000 towards the end of his death. And that could be done on the same person and over very different sessions. Sometimes that could be just as little as 5 minutes with one person. So it varied from person to person. But yeah, he saw people every day, even up until his death in 2016. He was still seeing people daily who might need spiritual counseling or exorcism. During his own lifetime, he felt that the vocation of exorcist wasn't being emphasized enough in the Catholic Church. When he started working, he worked with a priest, Candido Amatini, who had been the sole exorcist in the whole Diocese of Rome for 30 years. By the time Father Amorth was done, there were over 30 exorcists in the diocese.
He had at one point said that some of the cases he handled, he was convinced that the individual might have been possessed by 1,000 demons. One person.
One person and 1,000 demons, and that's why it would take sometimes when he would be seeing what he called patients, they wouldn't be just one and done session. He would have to see the person for sometimes years. In one case I know of, he saw the person for almost a decade.
Yeah, he talked about repeat times. It's not just like the movie. You don't pop in and pop out. What causes demonic attacks, Michael?
Father Amorth thought there were three major causes. The most dramatic one, of course, is making a pact with the devil. But the one he saw probably the most often was that people would go and procure curses or spells, things like that. This was especially common in Italy. This isn't just your tarot card reader or whatever. This would be an actual working magician that would be trying to secure curses. And that caused, in his experience, the majority of demonic attacks. And then there are the demonic attacks that, kind of like the book of Job, where God permits the demonic attacks in order to help bring about holiness.
He was asked if the devil ever struck inside the Vatican, and he said yes, 1981, the attack on John Paul II, when he was almost assassinated. And he believed that was the work of the devil.
He absolutely did. He also believed that the missing Vatican girl, spacing on her name, was also the work of a satanic cult within the Vatican. And he said on numerous occasions that he believed Satanism and Satan himself were operating within the Vatican's political council.
Would you have liked to have met him?
Oh, I wish I had. Like, our lifetimes overlapped just a little bit, but I really would have liked to have met him, if nothing else, not only to ask him more deeper questions about some of his theories, like the devil being in the Vatican, but also he had just a killer sense of humor. At times when he would be doing exorcisms, if the devil started yelling or interrupting him, he would say, "Shut up, you're not worth a cigarette butt." And that was a common phrase he had for demons.
What got him involved in exorcisms?
Pure and simple, he was asked to do it by the former exorcist of Rome, Candido Amatini. Initially, when he was asked, Father Amorth was very reluctant. He kept saying, I'm not an exorcist. I'm a jokester. I play pranks. I'm not really someone who should be involved in this. But he felt called to it, and after Amatini kept insisting, no, we really need someone like you to be an exorcist, he said, okay, I'll do it. He went through about 6 years of training to learn how to be an exorcist, and then he finally got his solo exorcism in the 1980s.
What possesses an individual?
You have to diagnose it by figuring out if the person is sick from anything else. So Father Amorth would work with doctors, scientists, psychiatrists to see if there was any natural explanation for what a person might be going through. Other ways to diagnose it, of course, would be exposing them to holy objects or holy water. He would introduce the person to holy water, but not tell them it was holy water to see if they would have a reaction. If they're especially disgusted by it or don't want to go into a church, that was usually a sign.
I would guess that, Michael, most doctors would diagnose someone as being mentally ill or schizophrenic or something like that, where Father Amorth would say, this is a demonic possession, we need to do some work.
You'd think so, but they often work together. In fact, most exorcists often have a doctor or two that they work with. And the reason why is they want to look for a natural explanation before they go to the supernatural. In a lot of cases, both in Father Amorth's experience, but also with other exorcists, the doctors will absolutely certify that they cannot find a natural explanation for the weirdness that is going on in this person's life.
He would consult with scientists as well. What did he try to get from them?
He asked particularly a professional group of psychiatrists within Italy to see if they could look more into demonic cases and cases of possession. Particularly what he found fascinating is while psychologists would tell him, yes, these things could be explained by psychology, it would usually be symptoms of multiple illnesses that could not be explained all at once. And so that's what he wanted them to do, is to study and find out if there were any other causes.
What causes a possession? What does the demon want?
Ultimately, a demon, whether it's doing the simple temptations, the good angel, bad angel on your shoulder type of thing, or full-on possession, or even haunting your house, they want to encourage rebellion of all of creation against its creator. So they want to sow chaos, they want to sow fear, and they want to put into people doubts that there is any good God that is ruling the universe.
And what generally gets rid of them? Why does it in some cases take so long?
A couple of reasons. One, the demons themselves may actually try to hide from the exorcist. Father Amorth had numerous times when he would try to talk to the demon or something like that. It would just freeze up and refuse to talk to him, and he would have to force it to talk. The individual possessed would either clam up, not even come into the church, or just freeze entirely. So you would have to, while performing an exorcism, basically command the demon to come and talk to him. In a lot of cases, people are possessed, are going through a lot of personal struggles as well. So there might be something they're holding on to, something they're fearing, and it could be up to the individual patient to really help get rid of the demon. So in some cases, it can take, like Father Amorth said, multiple dozens of cases. And in particular, his last case, it actually went until his very death.
I had heard that the church had about 120 active exorcists at any given time. Is that a pretty accurate number?
It is a pretty accurate number. There was a while there when it was probably under 30. It's really low. Through the work of Father Amorth, it's probably actually over 200 now.
And how does he know somebody is possessed?
Through spiritual discernment. This was something he himself claimed he didn't think he had a lot of, and he preferred his instructor, Candido Amontini, and said that he had better spiritual discernment. But we know from all these writings, Father Amorth clearly had discernment of spirits and was able to figure them out almost intuitively. But there was also the signs, like someone who was afraid of holy objects, water, the cross, relics. And there's also the signs if anybody is aggressive or just will not go into a holy place, such as a church or a chapel.
He once said that of the 30,000 exorcisms he did during a particular period, only 94 of them were actual full-blown possessions. That seems low.
A lot of cases he saw, it was less than 1% of all the people that he would see in and day out that needed a full major exorcism. So it was pretty low. A lot of cases could be explained either they were medical issues that were manifesting in a spiritual sign, or they weren't a full-on possession. They were what's called an infestation, which is your classic haunted house. And he said he got that call probably more than anything. People reported hearing strange phenomena or seeing strange phenomena in their home.
Well, he was based at the Vatican, right?
He was based in the Vatican. He often worked at the Chapel of the Holy Stairs, which is in Rome, right next to St. John Lateran, the chief cathedral in Rome.
Was he ever scared?
He was not. He claimed that he never felt fear in all of these cases, even at the beginning when he was under instruction from Amontini. He had full confidence in his guardian angel, in the sacraments. He also personally felt Padre Pio, who was a spiritual director to him, was often interfering and helping in these exorcisms.
Did he have any particular prayer to rid the demon?
He shares a couple in his books, but he would pray in particular, and this is one we all can pray. You don't have to be a priest, but the Litany of Saints. That is, you call upon each of these saints, including your guardian angel and the St. Michael the Archangel, to protect you. And he also turned to Mary, the Mother of God, which we Catholics love, and he would turn to her very quickly. He had a deep, profound love of Mary. In fact, was involved with Marian devotion before he was involved in exorcism.
What do you think of the statues of the Blessed Virgin that are going around the country where people will go to parlors or homes for miracles, expecting to see the statue tear up.
It's interesting. I have not seen one of these statues in person yet. My grandmother, on the other hand, who I adored, she saw one of these weeping statues and believed it was very miraculous. Shows like even in our technological age, we still look for the mysterious and the miraculous.
Now, Father Amorth died at 91 years old, something like that?
Yeah.
In 2016, not that far away.
And he led a very long and productive life, encouraging many of the exorcists who work now in the Catholic Church owe their vocation to Father Amorth and his work.
Do you think he's in heaven now, or did the demons try to get him?
I'm sure that he is in heaven and that the demons let out a cry of annoyance that he got into heaven. I personally believe he prays for all of us who work in trying to preserve his memory and his mission. I sometimes feel him myself, and I'm thankful for him.
How many supernatural disturbances did he encounter?
He encountered quite a few. He mentioned, oddly enough, levitation was an occurrence he only experienced twice as an exorcist. That one was his very first exorcism where he encountered...
Once is too much.
Once is too much, I agree. And this being also encountered itself as Lucifer. And he experienced in that exorcism the cold room. There was ice forming on the windows. He frequently had people who would spit at him, but the spit would turn to nails. So they were effectively spitting straight nails at his face.
Wow.
He kept several of those nails actually in his office.
Did he ever get hurt?
He would get minor injuries, such as being punched or one of those nails would make contact. He usually had a couple of assistants helping him out in the exorcism, so he was generally safe, but there was definitely some concern there for physical safety.
With Michael Lichens, he is part of the Sophia Institute, which publishes books like The Exorcism Files, The Devil is Afraid of Me. Michael's website is his name, mlichens.com, which is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. It's also the Sophia Institute. Tell me about the Institute.
Sophia Institute was originally founded by some philosophy majors who wanted to be able to publish some of the books they were just not able to get a hold of. It turned into one of the largest religious publishing houses in America. So we publish, like you said, the Exorcism Files, the books of Father Amorth. We're always publishing new books by him. And we also republish old spiritual classics.
How did you get involved in this, Michael?
I got involved because I'd always had a curiosity about exorcism. I'd interviewed a couple exorcists as well as people who had been involved in the ministry. And so when we started publishing Father Amorth's books, I was glad to be able to edit them. And I also said, you know what, I would really like to represent these and encourage more people to read Father Amorth because I think he is one of the most fascinating priests of the 20th century.
What did Father Amorth think a demon was?
He believed that a demon was a former angel that had rebelled against God and then was cast down from heaven as shown in the book of Revelation by St. Michael. And when they were cast down, they were entered into a hell of their own making. And now the demons basically stalks the world as an inhuman spirit that wants to act hostilely towards humanity and all things that God created.
Why do some people get possessed and others don't?
Some of that comes down to, according to Father Amorth, to just the mystery of God's providence. Who knows why God allows some suffering to happen to some people and not to others? But in most cases, it comes down to also your willingness to engage in the demonic. This is especially a bit of a cautionary tale for all of us who are curious about the supernatural. There are times when we can be a little too curious and we can want to commune with spirits, try to engage with them, try to trick them or trap them. And people in those positions who may get too involved in the occult are more likely to get possessed.
Now, what can the average person do, Michael, to fight off a demon on their own without having to bring an exorcist in? And then how do they know they're getting bombarded by one?
They can start off on their own by simple prayers. A confident prayer in taking ownership of your home is sometimes all you have to do. There's also sacramentals like holy water, blessed objects. I'm one of those people that keeps a crucifix and a rosemary bush and things like that to keep ghosts away. You can also call in a priest who is not an exorcist, but if you're really starting to notice things like bumps in the night, voices, scratching at the wall that you're not sure of, that's when you might need to call in an exorcist. And that's also when you would have to go through the proper channels at the Catholic Church.
Do you think most people have had some kind of demonic experience and they didn't even know it?
I think that happens a lot more than we would assume. For one, we know that demons sometimes like to present themselves as other entities. It's a classic case where a demon pretends to be the ghost of a little girl to gain your trust. And so I think there are times when we are encountering inhuman evil spirits without fully knowing what it is. And especially because we're still human and we're bound by nature, it can be a very confusing time.
Did Father Amorth ever bring a spirit home with him because he was always in front of one?
Sometimes the demons would actually try to follow him or intimidate him himself. This rarely went well for them, as one demon told him in the middle of a session he was considered too protected to be able to attack.
Have you ever witnessed, Michael, an exorcism?
I've witnessed a couple minor ones and one major one I can't fully get into, all of which, the minor ones in particular, some friends of mine who had a house that they were afraid was what Father Amorth called infested. And that might have been one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It made me a believer in the paranormal, whereas before I was a little skeptical.
The one you can't get into, is there a reason for that?
The reason why is just for the privacy of the people that were involved.
Tell us the story without names.
So I can tell you the story of the house in particular, and I'll tell you also the person involved. The house was an old one that had been used previously by an occult group in town, and they had tried to summon, using what was called the headless rite, to try to summon an ancient demon. Did not work, but the people who moved into the house afterwards, some people I knew, had started to experience everything from the manifestation of a giant black dog in the middle of the night. They heard scratches throughout their house. One of the people in that home ended up becoming possessed and needed to have an exorcism performed on them. And that was, in fact, done. Thankfully, it only needed one session. The house itself was blessed. Crosses were placed at every entrance. It was also given its Epiphany blessing, which you might remember from your childhood when they write in chalk the blessing above the door. And all that was done, and thankfully it brought relief. But I, myself, while I was in this house, experienced cold spots. I felt somebody grabbing me very aggressively when there was no one there. Again, one of the most sobering and most paranormal experiences I've ever encountered.
Did you want to get out of there fast?
I very much did. The only thing that really helped me was the confidence of the priest at the time. He was a priest from the San Francisco area who had a very great case of spiritual discernment, and he was confident and not afraid, and that made us more so not afraid. But until then, I wanted to go, okay, this house is haunted. You all best of luck with yourselves. See you later.
I would not recommend people go to exorcisms for fun, right?
No, I would not recommend it at all. Father Amorth talked about the demons can know hidden things, and while he never had anything like the demons knew sins, that was something other exorcists that he worked with encountered. And Malachi Martin, another famous exorcist, reported that directly.
But Malachi Martin came before Father Amorth, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he was a little bit older and died beforehand, and he wrote Hostage to the Devil, I want to say in 93.
He used to come on this program quite a bit with Art Dell.
Yes, he did. Oh, yeah, those were great episodes.
What would Father Amorth be saying right now on this program?
He would be telling you that there is no need to fear ever. He would like to remind everyone that the Bible tells us that we have control over evil and that we have nothing to fear, despite all the ways the devil might want to scare us, whether it's the extraordinary means like possession or the ordinary means like tempting the world into evil. We don't have anything to fear, and we have full confidence in God.
His work, of course, was amazing. Who taught him?
That was also an impressive exorcist, Father Candido Amontini, who worked at the Chapel of the Holy Stairs next to St. John Lateran for years as an exorcist. And like I said, in Rome, he was often the only exorcist working in the entire diocese. And so he taught Father Amorth the ins and outs of exorcism for several years.
What are some of the things, Michael, that the demons would reveal in an exorcism?
They would reveal all kinds of things from the very good, like they would reveal the spirits that were working on behalf of Father Amorth. There was one incident when Father Amorth was performing the exorcism, and the demon started yelling at Padre Pio. And according to the demon, it's because the Padre Pio was standing right next to Father Amorth praying the exorcism. Padre Pio had been dead for 30 years at this point, so that was something incredible. But they would also try to reveal any secrets people had, any type of things they thought they were doing on their own, meetings like that. They also would reveal particularly occult practices that would reveal them and it caused them to attack. And finally, they would try to reveal anything that they thought could distract or hide or scare people in the exorcism.
Did he ever talk about his personal family that he came from?
Yeah, he certainly did. His dad and his grandpa were both attorneys, and he thought he was going to be an attorney as well. Then World War II interrupted the plans for him to go to law school or join the seminary. And he fought valiantly, won a Medal of Valor fighting for the partisans in Italy. I like to say that's where he first learned to fight evil, was fighting the Nazis and Mussolini as a partisan.
I wonder what that was like. Was he at the Vatican during World War II? He would have been about 20 years old, right?
Yeah, he didn't go to the Vatican, but he served in northern Italy, particularly in the mountains and plains around Medina, his hometown.
Did he ever talk about why there was a shortage of exorcists in the church?
Yes. He believed that there were spiritual and political conditions that made it so that there was a shortage. There's, of course, the cultural reasons. The Enlightenment made us less sure about an invisible world, made us less sure about miracles and angels, and exorcisms would have gone with that. But he also believed that the church itself had elements within it that were trying to downplay or even ignore the reality of spiritual warfare. And he says that these two secular and religious political strands basically made it so that the exorcist vocation was not regarded highly. It was a dead end for any priest who might want to get into it. And so with that de-emphasis, the vocation just dried up. So instead of having what you're supposed to have, which is an exorcist in every diocese, sometimes you'd only have a couple exorcists for the whole country.
Did he ever believe that some of our world leaders were influenced by demons?
He absolutely did. Controversially, he would claim that world leaders were often trying to commune with Satan in secret rituals and secret satanic pacts. He believed that this was happening everywhere from Washington, D.C. to the Vatican City.
Really?
Among the people he selected included Mussolini and Hitler, that he believed that their occult rituals and curiosity about the spirituality made them ripe pickings for demonic influence.
Was he particularly, even though he was Catholic, of course, religious?
Mm-hmm. He was very religious before he became a priest even. He had a particular love of Mary. He was friends with Blessed Giacomo Alberoni, who founded the religious order he would eventually join. And he was a spiritual protege of Padre Pio for several decades. He started seeing him in the 1940s, and through Padre Pio's death in the mid-60s, would visit him at least a couple times a year. And it was Padre Pio who introduced him to the concept of spiritual warfare. If your listeners have never studied Padre Pio, he's a fascinating figure.
He bled the stigmata in his hand.
He bled the stigmata. He did battle with demons, and he saw angels and could communicate with his angels. So he introduced a lot of people to spiritual warfare, but particularly Father Amorth.
With Padre Pio, he bled from his hands.
Yes.
He couldn't have been a trickster.
No. Several people studied him and tried to see if he was somehow causing his own injuries, because he would bleed from his hands. He would also bleed from his side, showing the wounds of Christ.
Like he was abusing himself or something.
Yeah, and there was no evidence, as far as I know, of any wounds that he was creating himself. It was all him experiencing Christ's love and Christ's pain all at once.
Did Father Amorth ever physically get hurt doing an exorcism?
Thankfully, nothing as dramatic as some other exorcists had experienced. He had been punched. He had been spat on. He always kept a handkerchief near him, because that was his most common attack, was people trying to spit on him.
Sure, he was sworn at, right?
Oh, he got sworn at by everybody. Demons regularly yelled at him, cursed him. this was a very frequent thing that he would incur.
They hated him.
They despised him. They often told him that he was one of the more hated men, and straight up, he was told that the devil himself was afraid of Father Amorth.
In the movies on exorcisms that I see, Michael, the priest is always saying, the body of Christ, the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that seem to scare a demon?
Two reasons. One is because they are afraid of Christ in general, but when they're talking about the body of Christ, they're talking about the body of Christ in both the Eucharist, but also that Christ took on the body of a person. So by doing that, he had made humanity holy again. And so hearing that again and again is showing that their work in trying to corrupt humanity vain from the start. And it's just a pain to them as well as a mockery of their power. And as St. Thomas More once said, the devil can't stand to be mocked.
Michael, in 1990, Father Amorth founded with the other priests the International Association of Exorcists. What do you know about that organization?
They are still a hardworking organization that tries to encourage the vocation of exorcists as well as train priests in the background. I've known several priests who've gone through their training in Rome, and they do some very good work. They also are often the ones that the media goes to talk about things like exorcism or the latest horror movie or things like that. And I've often asked, is there a way, can a demon attach itself to you? Can that sort of thing happen? Turns out it's a common fear of a lot of people, and while, yes, it does happen, a lot of exorcists have particular rituals and ways about themselves that while they get assaulted and they'll get taunted by demons, they don't have to fear too much about it following them home everywhere.
In your opinion, if you want to ward off a demon before anything happens, what would be some of the best techniques?
The best techniques you can have are, one, any place where you can be confident and assured of yourself and your safety is the best place to be. And I find that is done through the Litany of Saints. This is where you can just take a special, Michael the Archangel is a good one, and you just say, St. Michael the Archangel, pray for us. Then you move on, St. Gabriel, pray for us, and things like this. What you're basically doing is you're asking lots of those that are in heaven to start praying for you and to watch out for you. And that's probably the most powerful thing you can do.
Paranormal writer Mark Leslie back with us. Among the stories we will talk with him about today is his new work called Spirits Untapped, Haunted Bars and Breweries. He lives in southwestern Ontario, Canada, often seen traveling to book events and his life-size skeletal companion friend with him, Barnaby Bones. And when he's not writing or reading, Mark can be found haunting bookstores, libraries, or local craft beer establishments. His latest work is called Spirits Untapped. What makes a spirit haunt?
I think it varies. Sometimes it's unresolved issues that weren't solved in life. A lot of the ghosts, a lot of the stories I've researched are people who met an unfortunate, untimely end. They weren't done, so they're still there looking for what it was, maybe mimicking the actions they were taking before they died. Lonely, wanting to connect with people. The other thing is potentially is one of the other theories that people have about ghosts or spirits is that maybe they're not the spirits of departed from the body. Maybe they're an impression, kind of like a cathode ray tube that somebody leaves in a place.
Who turns them loose on us?
Oh, I think we turn them loose on ourselves. What it usually happens with some sort of tragedy or some sort of really emotional, resonating event. But I also think that there are people who are more sensitive to be able to see things. Just like when you think about fine wine, friends who can taste wine and they can just pick out all these nuances in the wine, and I go, well, it's good, or I don't like it. There's sensitive people like that with ghosts as well.
What got you into this?
I'm scared of the dark. I grew up terrified of the shadows. I'm in my mid-50s, and I'm still scared of the dark, to be quite honest. Yeah, I'm just fascinated by the unknown and the things that we can't explain. So that's really what's driven me throughout my writing career.
You ever go into a dark closet?
Yes.
I don't want to scare you now. I don't want to scare you.
No, not now. Not now. I got to stay here with all the lights on because I'm going to be sharing some scary stories. I'm going to scare myself.
The book is entertaining, but it's pretty scary strange, too. How'd you come up with all these stories?
Well, I love bars and breweries. I love craft beer. And when I travel, I love going to check out local places, local beers, local breweries, local bars. I love hearing the stories, right? The people who create the places. So I really like the backstory. But then you can't help but pick up on ghost stories when you're in places like that. And the most fascinating connection when you think about bars and breweries and ghosts is you think about ghosts just trying to connect back with what they lost, right? Come back in touch with us. And why do we go to bars and breweries and restaurants and places like that, drinking establishments? It's usually to connect with other people. And so I've had a heck of a time traveling and going to, allegedly or reported haunted bars and breweries, sitting at the bar, having a few drinks, just listening, see if I can pick up some stories from some regulars, and then talking to the owners and the staff and the bartender and stuff like that. And usually, if the mood's right and it's not too busy, I can usually get some good stories from them.
Well, do the stories come primarily from the patrons, or are the bars themselves haunted?
I think the bars themselves are haunted. I'm not hearing the stories from the ghosts. And it's most often the staff. Sometimes it's the patrons who are very regular. The Norms and the Cliffs of Cheers who are there every day all the time. But then the staff are usually the ones who share because they're the ones who tend to be there after hours when they're closing things down. And that's sometimes when it's not as noisy and boisterous. That's sometimes when people report seeing and experiencing strange things.
Does it have anything to do with the alcohol?
Now, that's always the challenge. For the most part, the bartenders and the owners are not drinking all night. Like maybe they have a glass of wine or a beer or something at the end of their shift as they're closing down, but they haven't been drinking all night. So chances are very likely when the reports are coming from the sober people in the room that it's not their, wild imagination that came from the bottle of beer.
Have any of these people been hurt?
The people who died, yes, for sure. Most of the stories, no. There's been fear. There's been things that have been broken, except for occasional shoving that people have felt and pushing. I haven't so far encountered anyone who's been injured. It's just been this weird thing that happened that freaked them out, something they saw, something they felt, something they heard.
How many books do you have out now?
I've got about 30 books now. I've only got half a dozen books that are on true paranormal events. Haunted bookstores and libraries, haunted hospitals, haunted locations, most of them through Canada, actually. So there's only about 6 of those so far. This one I co-authored with my partner, Liz. We both love craft beer. And we hang out at a lot of craft beer places. We were actually at one this evening after she finished work. It's not haunted except by a bunch of beer-loving people. Yeah, that's just something that we do. So it's actually been a really fun experience because it's just another excuse for us to go, have a beer somewhere, chat with the bartenders, maybe pick up some stories. And we've even done long road trips where we purposefully mapped out spots that we knew from the research. Okay, there's some stories from this particular location. Let's make sure we make a point of stopping in there and seeing if we can get some in-person events. And we've gotten some of our stories from those in-person investigations, which is really way more rewarding than just reading from a magazine or a newspaper article.
How do you begin when you go into an establishment? How do you even bring up the subject?
I usually ease into it. Get a beer, sit at the bar often, because the bar is where you can have a good conversation with the bartender, especially when it's not that busy. And then you just kind of feel them out if they're open to having those conversations. And that's usually when I say, hey, so I've heard some stories. And you can tell if they're interested in talking about the stories or not. So I know whether to keep going or just to climb up.
And, of course, don't drink and drive, right?
For sure. Always designated driver. We're taking Ubers to get to the places, all those things.
Spirits Untapped, where do people get this book?
So it is forthcoming book. We've been working on it for quite a few years, and here's the challenge. This is one of those books that I love working on it so much. I wonder if I will ever finish it or I'm just going to have to keep doing new editions.
What percent is it done?
The funny thing is every time we think we've got all the stories and then we just have to refine them, we just keep finding new ones and new ones. And so that's why we may be looking at doing multiple editions of it. But we have been running spiritsuntapped.com, and we've been sharing some of the stories on that website just to kind of capture them for now until the book gets finished.
Have you had any stories of somebody dying in a brewery or a bar?
Yeah, now oftentimes they would have died in the rooms upstairs from the bar, like where there's saloons where they have the rooms upstairs.
Not in a fight or anything like that.
There's some gunfight stories where poker games got a little out of hand and then somebody was shot. Back to the War of 1812, there's Captain Swayze who was stabbed to death hiding in a wine barrel. But I haven't had any more recent ones, like from a bar fight. These all tend to be 50, 60, 70 years old.
Who stabbed Captain Swayze hiding in a vault?
This was back in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, so not far from Niagara Falls. It's the Old Angel Inn. It's just a beautiful English pub. It's got rooms upstairs. And Captain Swayze, he was a British soldier, and he was staying in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Fort George was already destroyed. The Americans destroyed it. He was attached to a woman that he loved, so he stuck around even though he was told to get out of Dodge. And so he stuck around. He was hiding at the Angel Inn, and he ended up hiding in a cellar in a wine barrel. And, of course, the enemy soldiers came in with their bayonets. They just kept stabbing all the different barrels, and they finally got to the one that he was in. And now, allegedly, it's his ghost that walks around. The washrooms are located right near where you get to the wine cellar. And that's usually where a lot of reported sightings are seen.
So they stabbed Captain Swayze.
Yeah, he still haunts the Old Angel Inn. So he's seen near the cellars there. There's actually weird things experienced in the rooms upstairs. The staff have talked about things getting misplaced and then reappearing again. He's one of those ghosts that apparently gets violent in terms of knocking things over when British flags are removed for cleaning from the building. That's one of those legacy things that I guess he hung on to even in death, desire to keep fighting.
Does he do anything violent to anybody?
Not to anybody. He does things to objects. He breaks glasses, but he has not, to any of the research I've done, he hasn't hurt anybody.
There's a place in Charleston, South Carolina that's haunted called Poogan's Porch. What is that?
So this is a beautiful Victorian townhouse. It's just got a place you can dine inside. They've got a patio. They've got a porch. There's just so many different locations in it. It was originally built in 1888. So there were various residents in the years, but in the early 1900s, there was a woman named Zoe St. Amand and her sister Elizabeth. They moved into the house. They lived alone. They were like spinsters living together, etc. They were really close, really, really close sisters. They kept to themselves mostly. Zoe was a school teacher, and she kind of dressed, that part. Long black dresses, wire rim glasses, sort of very Puritan, more Puritan, I should say, than Southern Belle. They lived together, and it was broken when Elizabeth passed away in 1945. Zoe, being so close to her sister, was devastated by her best friend, basically, who had died. So she fell into a very deep depression. Her mental health started to deteriorate, and she didn't have any support, any help to help her with all of this. She became so delusional. There's stories of her crying out her sister's name while wandering down the street in the middle of the night, and that's Queen Street, which is where that's located. And neighbors were concerned for her well-being. They had to basically put her in a hospital. They were worried that she was going to hurt herself. She ended up dying in the hospital. However, the belief is that she came back. She needed to come back because she wanted to be with her sister. So even though she didn't die in the home, she was in angst in the home for a long, long time. So there's a belief that she still comes back. And at night, even from across the street, you don't even have to be in the building, people allegedly still see her wandering up and down the street in front of the place. She's also been seen in the ladies' room of the restaurant there. So sometimes a woman will take a glance in the mirror, and then they'll see her behind them, and then they turn and there's nobody standing there. And they describe her as a woman in a long black dress. So terrifying. And yet she doesn't hurt anyone, but she's just there and obviously still mourning, even though she's died as well, but mourning her sister.
Do these ghosts look physical in that solid, I mean?
Well, in that particular case, yeah, the stories are that when a woman's standing and she looks in the mirror, she actually believes, she's surprised, I didn't know there was somebody there, somebody standing right behind her. Looks real. For a lot of the stories are the apparitions that they're seeing look like a real person standing there taking up physical space.
There's a place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Shaker's Cigar Bar that was built on top of an old cemetery.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually known as America's most haunted cigar bar. And they play that up a lot at Halloween, of course. The funny thing is if you go by at night, there's no mistaking that they play this up because they embrace the reputation, the stories that have been told. It's lit up in purple. They even have cute ghosts in the windows, top of the roof, etc. So this was built in 1894, and it was the Schlitz Brewing building. Prohibition hit. And, of course, that's when the Capone brothers took ownership of the building. They operated as a speakeasy. And then, of course, the brothel on the top 2 floors. But the basement is where their secret hideout was. You know, it's dark, old, cobwebs everywhere, etc. And there's a cistern that Marley Decker, who is a tour guide at Shakers, has said every time they try to cover up the cistern, as if something needs to get out of there. There's a quote from Marley says, "The well goes down so far to the point that you can't see the bottom." So you can imagine that when the Capones owned this building, this is probably a really perfect place for them to throw things they never wanted to be found again. And throwing things or maybe throwing people.
How did you find all these places?
Just research. I mean, you start off with a bit of a search. You find a newspaper article. You find videos. I mean, I found some of this information from an article from a local newspaper that was writing about the place around the time of Halloween. And Halloween is a perfect time because lots of local newspapers love to share. They get into the creepy stories that time of year. They're like me all year.
There's a place near Portland, Oregon called McMiniman's White Eagle Saloon. Tell us about that.
This is one of those other places I've had a personal experience with. Liz and I went there on a beer tour, and we ended up staying there. So McMiniman's is a company that purchases old historic buildings and landmarks, and they brew beer. They're a mostly Oregon company. This is on Russell Street in Portland. It's near the Willamette River. And so according to the legend of this building, so it's got a beautiful saloon and bar downstairs, and it's got rooms almost like a bed and breakfast where you have a room, but then there's a shared shower and bathroom, restroom, etc. According to the legends, there was a woman named Rose who worked at the saloon for years, and she was a working girl who frequented it. So as the stories go, she fell in love with a sailor. Sailor loved her back dearly, but he was married, of course. So he left on a long voyage, and when he came back, he found out that she'd been murdered. Some of the stories say that she thought he had left her and committed suicide, but she haunts the upstairs room. So Liz and I ended up going and staying there because we love to try to stay at places. We had a great time. There's live music on the weekends. It was fantastic. When I stayed up late and I was wandering around the halls trying to take pictures and get recordings. But the funny thing is, and we talked about this earlier, is I'm a big chicken, and I ended up having a little bit too much beer. I was doing a live video just to talk about being, hey, I'm in a haunted place, and I'll share some stories. And probably it was like 1:30 in the morning. I'm walking down the hallway doing a live broadcast. But places like that are quite interesting. There's another ghost there named Sam who apparently plays tricks. He'll back up the toilets and the bathroom. Even when there's nobody using the bathroom, they just back up for no reason. Well, it's not funny for the staff, but apparently it's funny for him. He doesn't have to deal with it. So, yeah, he's just one of the other ghosts that's allegedly appeared there.
Tell us a story about the Winking Judge of Hamilton, Ontario.
Well, I have to say the Winking Judge is actually one of my favorite bars in Hamilton, Ontario, and I first discovered it when I was working on the book Haunted Hamilton. And then I ended up becoming a regular at the bar after I started researching it because not only did they have some ghosts, it's named after an elderly man in a top hat who's known as or nicknamed as the Judge. And he's been seen more than 50 times by different guests. He wears a dark suit, the top hat. He usually appears during the evening when it's open. Sometimes he's been seen hovering outside the window of the men's room on the second floor. One of the most fascinating stories I heard from the owner at the time, Mary, is she would get in. The bar would open at 3 o'clock every day and, stay open till 1, 2 in the morning. She would go there, and her daughter would often come with her from school and be there until her father picked her up. So she would just be there and playing. She was upstairs on the second floor, and Mary was around the bar getting some stuff ready, and she could hear her daughter having a conversation. She's probably about 10 years old. Mary went upstairs and said, "Who are you talking to?" And her daughter said, "Oh, the really nice man in the top hat, he sits at the table by the window over there." And Mary had already heard stories about the man in the top hat. So she didn't say anything to her daughter, didn't want to freak her out, didn't want to scare her. But that's one of the tales. And, oftentimes when I was talking to the bartenders there, he would say, "Yeah, I could swear sometimes I'd be cleaning up, I'm by myself, or someone's downstairs changing the kegs, and I'm at the bar, no one else is in the building, and I think I see someone sitting over by the window out of the corner of my eye, but when I look, there's nobody there." The other thing about the Winking Judge, there's a ghost cat there, which is quite fascinating because it was at one time a bar that was animal friendly. People could bring animals in and stuff like that. So you sometimes be sitting there, and this has never happened to me, but I've talked to regulars who would say they'd be sitting and they would feel a cat brush up against their leg. And the natural inclination, if you're an animal lover, is you reach down to pet the cat. There's nothing there ever when that happens. And so there would be the sound of meowing sometimes, but most often you would feel this cat brush up against you as if it wanted to be petted, and there was nothing there. And so that was kind of an interesting story about the judge.
Didn't you visit a place that was in a Stephen King movie, a haunted movie?
This is the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. No, I haven't actually been there yet. I was always fascinated by that story. So this is The Shining. He was there with his wife. It's Estes Park, Stanley Hotel. It's a huge stately lodge, very similar to the one you see in the Stanley Kubrick movie and read about in the book. They ended up being guests at it right at the end of the season as it was about to close. So it was just Tabitha and Stephen, and they were there by themselves. They'd heard stories that, haunted room 217, etc. And he had nightmares of the fire hose from the hallway chasing him down the hallway.
Oh, my gosh.
To strangle him.
Like a snake.
He gets up in the middle of the night because he was freaked out. He was just panicked. Had to go get a cigarette, and he's looking out the window, and he said by the time he finished the cigarette, the ideas for what the book were going to be came into mind. And one of the things I love about the book and the movie with Jack Nicholson is a lot of the scenes take place at the bar. The bartender, he's there by himself. He has a drink, and then all of a sudden there's a bartender there. And obviously every patron besides him and the bartender are all ghosts. And that's just beautifully magically done because it really captures the essence of what a bar is, like that energy and the spirit and all of the stuff that's going on 100 years after these people are no longer there.
Are you invited most of these places, or do you just show up?
I've been invited to a couple places. For the most part, I research. I sometimes call ahead. I don't often get a chance to, and I just go. Like I said, I feel it out, and I want to see, is this something that they're into? Some of the places, they don't want to talk about it, or it's not the right time or whatever. So that's the other element. So sometimes you have to kind of hang around for a while just so they can get to know you. I mean, I was a regular at the Judge, and over the years, getting to know so many of the other regulars, and then just over the years picking up the stories, that was a lot of fun. Of course, that means the research is going to take a long time.
You have what you call a Google map, don't you, that you have Spirits Untapped on it?
So when Liz and I started, when we knew we wanted to put the book together, I got the domain spiritsuntapped.com. The map is kind of a fun thing because we've been be together for 10 years now, and we enjoy going out for beer at different places. The map has every single place we've had a beer together, like a restaurant or a bar or a brewery or something like that. But it also has a little ghost figure for the ones that happen to be haunted, kind of for beer lovers, but also if you're looking for ghostly places. So it's just sort of a way for us to track ghostly places, but also those places that we've had a chance to get together. And it's way fun when we've actually been to a haunted place and had a beer there, because that's usually when you get to talk to the staff and they share some really fun stories with you.
We're talking with Mark Leslie, who's working on a book called Spirits Untapped, Haunted Bars and Breweries that are all over the place. Do you find most of these places in Canada, Mark, or the United States?
There's a lot more in the States. Obviously, there's more geography, there's more people, there's more history. I mean, the U.S. has been established a lot longer. A lot of them that I've gone to in person have been in Canada, but I have been to a good number of them in the States. So most of them are in Canada and the U.S., although there are, of course, once you get into England and the UK, there's obviously lots of really old haunted locations there. What's the story of the Pioneer Saloon in Nevada? This is an intriguing one. So this is about 30 miles south of Las Vegas. It was built in 1913. It's a place for miners, a place to have a few drinks, meet up with some women of the night. It used to be frequented by Clark Gable. There's actually a tragic story where he was actually waiting for word of a terrible plane crash, which was his wife, Carol Lombard, who unfortunately did die. That's where that happened. That's where he got the news. That's where he's waiting for. And they used to go to it all the time, but he never went back again afterwards. But there's supposed to be two ghosts there. One of them is a gambler. His name is Paul. He was killed in a poker game in 1915. There's a group of them. They're all playing a bunch of different characters. And one of the gamblers tried to cash out with $10 and was thought by the dealer, whose name was Joe, to be cheating. Joe pulled out a pistol and emptied it into him. Paul died. And so people continually see Paul hanging out by the poker tables and other places in the bar. Most often where the poker tables were, that's usually where he's seen. The other ghost seen at the old Pioneer Saloon, someone believed to be a prospector or a miner, you can see him wearing a crumpled up cowboy hat, and according to the people who've seen him, he's not very tall at all. He's usually seen hanging out at the bar itself, doesn't seem to mean anyone any harm. But almost every employee who's worked there over the years is said to have seen the miner at one point or another, and every single time that they say he's just there, he's just hanging out. There's another story from that place of a ghost who's drinking at the bar. There was a gentleman, I should say, who was drinking at the bar, and he collapsed and died right at the bar. He is also seen. He doesn't look the same as the other calm ghosts you've seen at the bar.
Have a heart attack or something?
Who knows, because it was early 1900s, so hard to tell. Sometimes beer disappears, and they believe it may be this guy who never got to finish his beer when he died.
Our guest is Mark Leslie. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He's got a number of books out, fiction and nonfiction, right?
Yeah. I write a lot of fiction, and I love doing research, writing true ghost stories, but I also incorporate some of that research into my stories as well, my fiction. When you see something, especially out of the corner of your eye or in the dark or whatever, you're not often seeing details. And often those details are something we may apply we remember it differently. So we may have seen a shape, and then we think, wow, that was weird. Maybe there was a shadow there. Was that a hat? That could have been a top hat. And you sort of fill in those gaps. I take that approach when I'm interviewing people and I'm talking about stories. I'll give you a perfect example. The haunted bookstores and libraries when I was doing it. Well, if the story is that the books fall off the shelves all on their own, that's not much of a story because I've worked in bookstores most of my life, and I'm aware that in the summertime, at least where I live in this part of Canada, paper will absorb the humidity, sure, and the books that are just standing there will fall. But I'm always looking for rational ways to describe or explain what happened. And I often think that in a lot of cases, if I heard somebody saw somebody with a cape and a top hat, for example, and I see a shadow, and I'm not sure what it is, I may convince myself that that's what I saw. That could be what we're potentially seeing, a little bit of what we're expecting to see.
Is there a science behind this, Mark?
Is it someone that's not physical? Is it something that's physical, or is it not physical? How can it be both? I guess is part of the allure of the mystique. But I was at a haunted theater with somebody, and they were showing me on my phone. My skeleton Barnaby was sitting there, and they were interviewing me for a podcast, and he showed me on his phone. He was looking at the camera app, and there were these weird lights that looked like they were shooting out of the ground right near where Barnaby was sitting up into the ceiling, like on a 75-degree angle. And my first inclination was, oh, that's an app. He's pranking me. And I turned on my phone, and I looked through it, and I saw the exact same thing. I have not been able to find out what electrical magnetic thing would cause our phones to show that wasn't visible to us. I have no idea. I'm still trying to find a scientific explanation, but I can't find any explanation for it. But it's still one of those just weird unknown things. In Lincoln City, Oregon, when I was there at Bob's Beach Books, there's a story of a portal there. But this was a couple that was looking for a portal to Lemuria. The only portal story that I remember very specifically because they disappeared, and the owner of the bookstore believes that maybe they did find a portal. But I've always been fascinated by the frequency of ghost stories at crossroads in general because they tend to have more power.
Have you ventured out past the United States and Canada?
Yeah, I've been through several countries throughout Europe and England. There's some great stories. I mean, I can tell you about the Ye Old Man in Manchester. This is the fourth oldest pub in England. It dates back to 1251. There was bloody battles that took place in front of the building where more than 1,000 people were killed, murdered. And James Stanley, who was the 7th Earl of Derby, this is like 1644, he was found guilty. So he was brought to justice, eventually to be put to death. But he did spend his last few hours inside his family's pub there. There's association with his chair that's haunted. But the most frightening story that comes from the pub, this goes to and you can search for this YouTube video from February 14th, 2014. The management of the pub discovered in the morning the security video stopped recording at 6:18 a.m. There's footage that shows from 6:17:52 to 6:18:10. It's about like 18, 19 seconds in total. And what happens is just there's weird flickering lights that start to appear. It looks like there's a door that's cracked open, and then on the far side of the bar, and then there's a really odd-shaped human head and shoulders that seem to be backlit that briefly appear that's adjacent to the bar. And then you start to see the shadow crawl up this wall on the right-hand side as if somebody was walking on the opposite side and their shadow was being cast. And that was just the most freaky thing when you look at it and you're thinking, okay, this is 20 seconds where everything just went, like the lights flickered for no reason because there was nobody there. All the lights were off. And there's weird shadows, and they can't explain what caused that phenomenon.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
Just watching the video, it creeps me out.
Mark, would you stay in a haunted room like overnight if you knew it was really scary?
With all the lights on, I mean, I've stayed in places that were allegedly haunted, but again, I had to pass out drunk the one night. Why do lights somehow prohibit the ghost from doing what it does? I don't know. Maybe it just prevents, like, if the lights are really bright, like there's no shadows, nothing can hide, nothing can sneak up on you in the dark. Because it's the darkness, right? It's the fear of the dark that I have anyways. And then at least when there's light, I get the sense that, okay, nothing can find me. Now, of course, if things start happening when the lights are on, I'm out of there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We've got your website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.